Okay, so the piece we're doing the Parsha here now, and the piece that I wanted to do tonight is a very interesting piece from Aaron Karliner in Bai Saharan. And he was, of course, one of the Talmidim of the Mizritcha Magid, who was a Talmud of Baal Shem Tov. And so he speaks about very, very high things. A lot of the original Talmidim speak about very, very high Chassidish Torah. Later on, as generations went on, these things were more and more concealed. But even in the Talmidim themselves, they were careful about how they talked about certain things. And they said it in a very cryptic way, probably because they were being persecuted, they didn't want to sound too extreme, whatever it is. This is a very interesting piece. And it's interesting because it goes a little bit into Kabbalistic ideas, and he has like a different twist on some of the on certain concepts, as we're going to see. And we'll try to figure out how that works together with the Arizal, right? So basically, what he's dealing with over here is he's dealing with in the parsha where it says, "V'titzchak Surah bekirba," that Surah laughed within herself. Laimor achrei beloisi hoiseli edna. Right. So it's almost like the simple way that the verses read. That when Surah was informed she's going to have a child after being a very old woman, so she laughed. It seems like she laughed like in the sense of not taking it seriously, like she didn't believe it. That's what it seems like. And that she laughed with herself. She said, "What? I'm such an old woman. Now I'm going to have a child." She didn't believe it. That's a simple translation. But of course, the Mefarshim, the commentators, are bothered with this because how could it be that if she's obviously we're talking about someone on a high spiritual level, right? She was Avram's wife, and Avram, like we learned last week's year, was on a tremendous spiritual level. The assumption is that his wife is too, especially since we see in the verses that Hashem told Avram to trust Surah with whatever she says. Like Surah did something very controversial, right? Avram's oldest son Yishmael and his mother, right? He was a baby, and his mother Hagar, who was Avram's handmaid, were in the house, and Surah said, "Throw them out." And that's, of course, a very difficult thing to do, to throw out the mother of your child and your child. It seems, most people would hesitate before doing that. And the Pasuk tells us Hashem told Avram, trust her, trust Sarah with what she's saying. So that a separate discussion, which is not for now, is exactly why that makes sense and why Hashem wanted Avram to trust her in such a interesting type of a demand. But my point here is that what we see from that is that Avram was told by Hashem that Sarah is trustworthy. So that means that she must be on a certain level herself. And if she's on a certain spiritual level, then why is she laughing when she's getting a message from Hashem that she's going to have a child, right? Even if she's 156, well, it doesn't matter how old she is. Even if she's an ancient woman, Hashem says you're having a child, you're having a child, right? So that's the question. So, and he deals with this, and he's going to explain sort of how the laughing actually represented something deeper. Because obviously, as we know, Hasidus always brings out, and Kabbalah always brings out, that things that we assumed a certain way are actually much, much deeper. A lot of times when we look at them on a deeper level, it ends up that they're actually almost the opposite of what it seemed to be saying. This happens all the time. So let's see. So he says over here, Bepusik, he quotes the verse, Titzchak Surah Bekirba, that Surah laughed within herself, Laimar, and she said, Achre Beloitzi, after that I'm already worn out and old, Hoisali Edna, I'm going to have Edna. So Edna is an unusual Hebrew word, and it's not exactly clear what it means. Rashi on the verse, he says, Perish Rashi Shnai Perish. Rashi brings two different interpretations how to understand the word Edna. And if you look in Rashi on the verse, this is what he says. Perish Echad Lushin Ma'aden Es Habusa. The first way to understand this word Edna is that it comes from Ma'adain, which means like from the Lushin of Aiden, like Gan Aiden, right? It's an expression of beauty, of delight. So the first understanding is that now that I'm old, the Edna, my body's going to transform to something delightful, right, into a nice, young, healthy body, right? That's the first interpretation of Edna. And that comes from Lushon HaKodesh. That's a Hebrew word, Aiden. And he says, Perishain, and then the Rashi's second interpretation is Sheilushin Zman, it's an expression of time. In other words, basically the way we're understanding it, according to the second explanation, is that she's saying, um, "Achar baloisi, now that I got old and worn out, haisili edna, suddenly I'm going to have time again. In the sense, I'm going to become young again and have more time in my life." That's the way to understand it. But the only problem is that that's not Hebrew. That's Aramaic, because the word idan, meaning time, is an Aramaic word, not a Hebrew word. So Rashi's first explanation gives an explanation where the source is Hebrew, and the second explanation is that the source is Aramaic, which could happen because Aramaic was the language spoken in Avram's environs, right? It was the Lucian that was spoken. It was the language that was spoken in Bovel, where he came from, right? So it could be, but it's a little bit more far fetched because usually the Torah speaks in Lashon Hakodesh. And he says Velushin Targums. Rashi's second explanation is in Aramaic. Shal Zman he hatirgem idan, because the word Zman, the word time, in Aramaic is idan. Okay. And we're going to see from Rabban Kalina's explanation why the first explanation is in Lashon Kodesh and the second in Hebrew, and the second one is in Aramaic. He's going to have a whole twist on this. All these little details are going to come together. So he says, "Venira." So it seems to me, Sheshnai Parishim Haim Emes. Both of these explanations that Rashi brings are true. And they're really talking about one thing. So notice what he's doing here, right? In Niglas HaTorah, in the revealed Torah, so we're talking about like the Talmud and the Talmudic commentaries. Usually, their approach, right, the approach of Niglas HaTorah on dealing with a problem or an issue, is to divide. So, for example, right, if a certain sage in the Talmud says in one place, says a certain thing, and then in another place, I don't have a specific example on top of my head, but I'm just going to say in general terms. If a certain sage says something in one place, and then another place says something that seems to be different, so what all the mafarshim, what the Gemara itself does, and what the Tosfos will do, with the different mafarshim on the Gemara, they're gonna try to make a difference. They're gonna say, well, in the first place, it said like this because he was talking about a certain scenario where that's true. But over here, where he says the opposite, that's because he's talking about a different scenario. So what we're doing is we're dividing things up, where it's called in Hebrew, it's called making chalikim, making different categories, so to speak. That's in Niglas HaTorah. In Pnimius Torah, it's the opposite. In Pnimius Torah, the tendency is to make everything one. So in the sense that you see somebody saying something in one place that sounds one way, and he's saying something in a different place it sounds like the opposite. Well, really, those two are both true. And the Kabbalah is going to show you on a deeper level why they're both true. This is what he's doing here too. Instead of saying, yeah, Rashi had two different ideas. One idea was that it comes from the illusion of Aiden, which is expression of delight or youthful, youthful vigor, so to speak. And the other expression it comes from the word Idan, which means time in Aramaic. And that's two different explanations. That's usually the way you would look at Rashi. He's saying, no, both of them are one. He's going to show how they're both one. So he starts with an introduction. It says, Dehinai, behold, we know that Hashem created the world with 7 days. The first thing he created was the 7 days themselves. I'm going to explain this in a second. And then he created every single day that which was appropriate for that day. And then that way, that day sort of manifested in this world. Basically, what he means over here is that we know, of course, the first chapter in Sefer Bereshis talks about the creation. It talks about the creation in 7 days. According to the Zohar Kodesh, the way it learns the 7 days is that 7 days are not actually talking about 7 days of time. It's actually talking about 7 different attributes, right? Because we know that the setup of the 10 spheres, which the spheres are Hashem's vehicles, so to speak, or how Hashem interacts with the world, each sphere has different attribute. So you have the top 3 are Keser and Chachma and Binah, right? Those are concealed because those represent a level that's above interaction with the physical world. The lower seven spheres are the ones that represent the interaction with the seven with the physical world. So lower seven spheres are chesed is the first one, is loving kindness or mercy. The second is gvira, which represents judgment. So those two are opposites, right? Because mercy is obviously Hashem conducts the world in a gentle way, and judgment is in a harsh way. Then you have Tefer's beauty is the balance of the two. Then you have Netzach, usually translated as victory or eternity, is a different attribute. Hoid is the next one, which is an expression of thanksgiving, also an expression of splendor. And then you have Yesoid, is the foundation, and Malchus is the kingdom. Those are the seven lower spheres. And those seven lower spheres, essentially, the Zohar says, when Hashem created the world in 7 days, what it means is that he created them using these seven attributes. So it doesn't necessarily have any statement about how long in time that creation process took. In fact, according to the Zohar, that first chapter of Brashis isn't even talking about the creation of the physical world. It's talking about the creation of higher worlds, which are in between those spheres and the physical world. So what he's saying over here is alluding to this, and he's saying that Hashem first created those seven attributes called the 7 days, and then he used those seven attributes to create different elements of the physical world, and of all the worlds. The truth is, right? Bria, Yetzira, Sia, all the worlds in between, where the spheres are in Atzilus and our physical universe, which is the bottom of that whole structure. All of those worlds are created using these seven attributes. And he says, Nimsa yesh zayin yomim iluin v'zayin yomim tatuin. So there's really going to be three different things. There's going to be the first 7 days, which are supernal. I'm going to explain this in a second. Then you have the second 7 days, which are seemingly a lower reflection of that. And then you have ho'ilam ilavish lazanyum. Then you have the actual physical world that we have, which is like a garment for those 7 days. Okay. So what it means over here is that we have this idea that even those seven attributes that we talked about, the seven lower spheres in Atzilus, which Hashem used to create all of the worlds, those are also a reflection of something higher. Because we know that one of the expressions for Hashem, which is used in Daniel in Parak Zion, in chapter 7 in Sefer Daniel, he had this vision. This is where like the idea that all the the Goyim have this idea that Hashem's like an old man with a beard, with a white beard. This is where it comes from. In Daniel in chapter 7, he says over there that Daniel saw a vision of Atik Yoimin, which usually translate as the Ancient of Days. And he saw Atik Yoimin, and it says over there he had a white beard and he had white hair and so on and so forth, a white garment. And that was a vision that Daniel had. The way that the Arizal explains to us what this vision represents, and also why it's called Atik Yoimin, Ancient of Days. That's a very interesting expression. Just say Atik, just say ancient. But what it really means is that's referring to the sphere of Keser, which is the highest thing. The sphere of Keser manifests in such a way, because on that level of Keser there isn't yet even the idea of judgment, because down below, like we mentioned, Chesed and Gvira, the first two of the seven lower spheres, one represents mercy, one represents judgment. Even in Chesed, that Chesed only exists as in contradistinction to judgment. So that Chesed is when Hashem has mercy, when he could have also chosen judgment. In other words, there's two options already. On the level of Keser, the very first sphere at the top of all of the 10, right? That level of Keser is so high that over there isn't even an idea, there isn't even that parallel of judgment. It's pure mercy at that point, right? Because of that, it manifested to Daniel, when Daniel's mind was interpreting this vision and trying to translate into human terms to make sense of it, right? So then Daniel's perception, it portrayed itself as a white beard, a white garment, and so on and so forth, representing that pristinity of pure mercy without any judgment to it. And that's called Atik Yoimin, right? Which Yoimin means days. So the Arizal says that's significant, because the idea is that those seven lower spheres that exist below, they are going to have their first primordial origin in Keser itself. Because we know there's a rule in Pnimius HaTorah, and the truth be told, it's a rule in the physical world too, that anything that exists in actuality had before that an existence in potential. So for example, so let me just see, someone just chatted a question. Talking about the spheres being that the speaker enters the life of Yaakov, the energy of Teferes come and manifest in the world in this time. Um, yeah, so Yaakov represented the sphere of Teferes. So because of that, Yaakov himself um, brought that midah, so to speak, into actuality. Because that's what the Ovas did. That's what means the Ovas were like Hashem's chariot, that they were able to be vehicles for these attributes. So that's true. Okay, but basically the idea is that everything that exists in actuality had its existence in potential. We have this in a seed, right? That seed, take a seed of any plant, an apple seed, right? That apple seed contains within itself the potentiality to become an entire tree. It contains the entire DNA and all the instructions for a tree to unfold and manifest. But yet you don't see a tree inside that seed, right? You cut open the seed, what do you see? There's just white stuff there. There's nothing there, right? It's all there in potential, but it hasn't been actualized. We really have this idea in general because we have this idea in science that energy cannot be created or destroyed and matter cannot be created or destroyed. That means that all the matter and all the energy that exists in the universe was there from the very beginning of creation. So that means that when you're eating an apple, right, and that apple has in it cells that contain energy, right? So that energy existed from the very beginning of creation because that apple is only the
I think that,
product.
hold on, I just want to say about the seed thing. I think it's more of a product of its environment because without the soil,
Mhm.
your DNA doesn't mean nothing.
That's true, right? So this is really the idea that something exists in potential, but in order to be actualized, it needs to have a certain type of an environment in order to be actualized. So that's true. The DNA itself, in other words, the potential itself is not worth anything until it's expressed, until it's actualized, and then there's many other factors that lead towards that. So that's a very good, very important observation. But the idea is basically, but so in essence, when you're eating it's even easier to understand when you're eating an animal. Like let's say you're eating a piece of steak, right? So you're not just eating that piece of steak, you're eating all the grass that cow ate that gave it the energy the energy goes into its muscle cells, right? And then that grass originated from the ground where it grew because the soil was transformed into, was made fertile by the decomposition of older plants. But kids are every single thing in existence traces back to the very beginning of creation. So everything's there in potential, but then it's only actualized afterwards. So the same thing is true on the spiritual level, right? That in even though there's those seven lower spheres of Atzilus, which are connected to the 7 days of creation, which are connected to the physical world and the way the physical world manifested, they themselves are actually only an expression of something that originally existed in Kesser in the first sphere, except over there it was all in potential. It wasn't yet actualized. That's why Kesser is called Atik Yoimin, ancient of days, because even those seven lower spheres are contained there in potential. So he's referring to this, and the Zohar explains this, and the Rizal is very thorough on explaining how this actually manifests. It's actually very technical. I simplified it. But basically, that's the idea he's referring to over here, that there's seven supernal days above. In the case itself, in Atik Yomin is the shortish for those 7 days. Then those 7 days are going to first manifest as a seven lower from that Keser. They're going to unfold through the Chochmah and the Binah, right into the seven lower spheres, and that's where they'll manifest. They'll be manifest for the first time in a concrete type of a way. That's called the seven lower days. But all of this is even before the idea of days as we know them, because this whole unfolding process is happening in this first world of Atzilus is before the creation of time. The whole idea that we're talking about sequentially, that was first in potential in Kesser, then it unfolded into actuality in the seven lower spheres, is also just us trying to grasp something that we don't understand, because sequence implies time. But we're talking here about a world that's before the creation of time. And the entire Sefer Etz Chaim from the Arizal goes through the long story of the unfolding of this world of Atzilus and how all the different parts and elements of this world unfolded. But we're talking before the creation of time in the first place. So what does that even mean that there's sequence and there's different things happening in different time frames, right? The whole thing is just us trying to grasp onto something that's totally beyond our ability to understand, because we can't understand anything without time, because time defines the world that we exist in, right? Ultimately, this manifests in the physical world in the idea of time. And the 7-day week is like our symbol to remember that that time traces itself back, because really the idea of a 7-day week does not have any physical reason why it should be so. In other words, the year is based on the cycle of the sun, right? And the month is based on the cycle of the moon. So those make sense. But the idea of a week and a day is based on, the orbit of the Earth. So all of those have an actual concrete physical basis why they are so. The week seems totally and completely arbitrary. And yet we see that the entire world pretty much, there were some places, like I think by the Incas, they had like a different amount of days in the week or whatever, but most of human society, for as long as we know, had a 7-day week. And so we see that there's something to it, right? The idea of the 7-day week is that we have a natural intuition, I guess, that that's how time should be structured, because time originates in this idea of the 7 days, which originates in the world of Atzilus. Okay, and then he says that our world, is essentially, with the time that exists in our world, is a garment to. A garment to just means an expression of those seven days in Atzilus, right? The garment's is always the expression. In the sense, a person, can train in the police force and he learns how to be a police officer, right? So then, but then he has to put on the police uniform, otherwise no one's gonna know he's a police officer. Who's gonna know unless he has a badge, right? So the idea is that the garment represents the expression of something. It conceals it in a certain sense, but it also expresses it. So the fact that the world is a garment for these 7 days means that the world is an expression of these 7 days, even though it conceals their light in such a way that that we can't see that original spiritual structure anymore. But that garment is also an expression of it. So he says, V'levish nikra kan. The idea of a garment could be called kan. Kan means a nest. Kmoi kan tzipor, he says, like a bird's nest. And there's a reason why he's saying that the garment's called kan, but on a simple level, we can sort of understand that the idea is, that the nest is, so to speak, is where the birds live. It protects them, and it is their next outermost garment, I guess. So because of that, it's compared to a garment, right? We talked about in the shirim this week. It popped up, I think, in yesterday's shir. I think it popped. The idea came out, and also in the Sunday shir, that we have this idea that the Rizal tells us that everything is garments upon garments. So he tells us that originally in the middle of everything, again, it's also simplifying because there is no real middle because things go on until infinity. But to take like a slice out of creation and look at it level by level. So take the human being, right? Inside us, in the very center of us, is our shorish neshama, the root of our soul, so to speak, which is in the middle. Then the garment around that is the soul itself, the neshama. The garment around that is the body. So the body is like a garment for the neshama. And the garment around that is the clothing that a person wears, which is obviously that's a garment for his body. And then the room, the space that the person's in, right? And on a deeper level, what the person's experiencing outside of himself is a garment onto his garment. So you have this multiple layers of garments. So a nest being a space, a safe space for a bird, right? A place where the bird feels secure, is like a garment. So he tells us, Vehi nikra atik yoimen. So now he tells us, and this idea that we mentioned of the 7 days having their original source in Keser, in the 7 days being the 7 lower spheres, having their original expression in the very first sphere, right? And I'll just add to this one more point just before we go on, that sort of also makes this connection. Rabbi Nachman mentions this in Torah. I don't remember which Torah, but one of Nachman's Torahs, yeah, he mentions this idea, where what's it called? Where we know that Chazal tells that the world was created with 10 utterances, 10 speech. Hashem spoke 10 times. So if you look through the first parak of Brashis, the first chapter of Brashis parak Aleph, it says Vayomer Elokim 9 times. So Chazal ask, why is it that they ask on themselves? Why is it that we're saying that it's 10 if you only have 9? Hashem's uttered 9 times to create the world. So they say that Brashis Nami Mamarhi. He says, but no, at the beginning of the Torah, where it says Brashis Bura Elokim, at the beginning Hashem created, that is also an utterance, even though it's not an utterance. It doesn't say Hashem said, it says Hashem created. So Rav Nachman explains that the idea is that this is a hidden utterance. It's a concealed utterance. It's a Mamar Susan, right? A concealed utterance. And the idea is that those 10 utterances obviously are going to be parallel to the 10 spheres, these 10 forces with which Hashem, through which Hashem manifests. And Keser is the first one. And everything is there in potential, but yet it's all concealed. So in other words, it almost sounds like the Torah is going back on itself, as the Torah first says, in the beginning, Hashem created the heavens and the earth, right? And then, so it sounds like it's finished, but then it goes into detail. The earth was tohu void, the earth was chaos and void, and there was a darkness. Hashem created the light, and Hashem created the land, and so on and so forth. That first verse is like an introduction to the entire creative process. And in that first verse is contained all of the creation that will follow in potential, right? So in that way, we see the same idea that the Keser contains everything else in potential, and it's all concealed there. So anyway, so the idea is that this original concealed aspect of the 7 days is called Atik Yoimin, the way it's expressed in Keser. It says, "Shamati me Amar Harav Agun." I heard from my master, who is, and I have here. The one I have has like a commentary at the bottom that says this means Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev. Okay, so he heard from Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev, was another one of the big Chassidish rabbis. He heard from him that Atik Yoimin Hisha Oris Shel Haboyer Burichi Shabuim V'Netikim Bayomim. He understands that Rabbi Levi Yitzchak understood the words Atik Yoimin. Usually we translate Atik as ancient and Yomin as days, ancient of days. But he translates the word Atik as an expression of netak, which netak is a verb in Hebrew that means to remove something from one place and put it in another. That's literally the word, the translation of the word. Because Atik Yomin means that it's an idea of days that was taken from one place and then transferred to another. Meaning that Keser has everything there in potential, and then that potential sort of taken from there and put in a different place, which is the actual expression of it in the 7 lower spheres of Atzilus, right? It's like the way to understand it is like a human being has DNA. Every single human being has unique DNA that's in his cells that's different than anybody else. And then when his sperm cell emanates from him and enters into the female to create the child, that sperm cell contains within it the entire DNA of that person. So it's like his DNA exists within him, right? And then I guess you could even translate netak as copied from one place, right? It's almost like his DNA is sort of copied over into that cell, which exits him and places that DNA somewhere else in order to create a child. Right, so it's an idea of like taking something from one place and copying it. Quoting is called atik in Hebrew also. You see when someone quotes someone, then the Hebrew word is matik, Lushan shell. He quotes the expression of so and so. Right, so the idea is basically, what does it mean that you're quoting someone? You're taking the words that are written in his book, and you take a line out of there that you want to put in your book, and you quote it, right? So when you're quoting it, you're essentially duplicating or copying that which existed before. So the idea is that Atik Yemen, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak understands it to mean an expression of potential, which is then copied from there and actualized in a different place. Okay. There says Nimsa Hayomin have Shiva V'Shiva. So it's 7 days in potential in Keser, and then 7 days the way they're expressed. in the bottom of Atzilus. And he says, Al derech shenemar, like it says in the Pusik, and he quotes from Zechariah, the Novi Zechariah, where it says, Shiva, Shiva, Miktzais, Lenairis, Asher al Rosha. It says literally the translation would be, it would sound awkward, but the literal translation is 7 and 7 were the lamps upon it. So basically, for those that aren't familiar, Zechariah Hanuvi had a vision where he saw a big menorah. We actually read this as the Haftorah on Hanukkah, on Shabbos Hanukkah, because it refers to a menorah. But the way that it's expressed is, instead of saying there were 7 lamps on the menorah, it says there's Shiva v'Shiva. It says like a double, 7 and 7. So Baron Kaliner is telling us the idea of 7 and 7 is this idea we're talking about now, that the original 7 were originally in potential in Keser, and then they were expressed below. And it says, Vamaskal, the wise one will understand. It says, Vazayin Yimai Braisha Shaboy Ba'olam Nikri Zukin, Zayin Kan. So he says that the 7 days of creation, the way they manifest in the world, are called Zukin, which means old. He's getting to how Surah said that she was old, right? That's where he's developing this to. Zukin is Zayin Kan, 7 that are a nest. So in the sense that the 7, the way that these 7 spheres are expressed in the world is like a malbush, is like a garment, or like a nest for, like a kan, which is a nest for the original Zayin, for the original 7, which were there in potential in Keser. So that's Zukin, Zayin Kan. And that's, by the way, Derech Agav, why also Zukin Kaviyuchel, an old person, is a person with a white beard, similar to what Daniel saw in his vision, right? Because it expresses this idea of this Keser manifesting down in lower levels. Okay. So now he tells us, all energy that comes to the world is going to come through these 7 channels, through the 7 lower spheres. Because the first 3 spheres of Keser, Chacham, and Bina, or Chacham, Bina, and Das, however you want to look at it, it's 2 different ways of looking at the same thing. No living thing can actually understand them, because that's the mind of God. Okay? So even though we all have our own Chabad, we all have our Chachman, Bina, and Das in our head, because that is our own mind that exists there. But the Chachman, Bina, and the Das of Atzilus is something that's totally beyond human comprehension, because that is literally the mind which directs, so to speak, the decisions that God makes, which is something that's totally beyond us, right? Anybody who thinks he understands the mind of God is mistaken, because we can't comprehend it, right? We have a tendency to look for synchronicities, look for patterns, and try to see that things happen a certain way because that must have been the divine plan. Of course, if it already happened, it must have been the divine plan, but we're not able to predict how these things go, and sometimes they go in ways that we don't understand. It's like I always say, if when a person shouldn't look at, if he trips in the street, that, oh, God must be punishing him, because you don't know all the factors, you don't know all the different reasons. It doesn't have to be a punishment, it could be something entirely different, right? We don't understand the mind. It's not like our mind, right? Hashem says, Yeshaya Novi quotes that Hashem says, "Machshavosai loy machshavosaichem, v'derechayichem loy deruchai omar Hashem." Nim Hashem. It says, Hashem says, my thoughts are not your thoughts, and my ways are not your ways. We can't grasp it. So that's why this light comes down to our world only through the 7 lower spheres, and not through the top 3, because those top 3 are kavyuchel, the mind with which Hashem operates. Again, that mind itself is not him himself. Hashem himself is even beyond that, because Hashem is even beyond that Atzilus, right? But at least even on that level that it's expressed there in Atzilus is beyond our comprehension, and not just our comprehension. But he says even the angels don't understand it. Even the Maluchim, the Chayes, the Siruf, and the different levels of angels also don't grasp this divine mind. And it says, and also we can understand it in the idea that these 3 moichin, these 3 aspects of mind, of Chacham, Bina, and Das, are not part of the structure of the world. What he means by that is we know that the seven lower spheres actually express themselves as the directions of physical space. Because as we learned this in Sefer Yetzirah, right? In when we learn to share with the Sefer Yetzirah tells us basically the idea is that if a person is standing in any space, he has six directions around him, right? Let's say he's facing towards the east because that's the way the Sefer Yetzirah portrays it. Then you could be looking, you could look to your north, you could look to your south, you could look towards the east or towards the west, or up or down. So there's six directions of space around any given point. And then the point itself, the center point, is also something. So that's seven. So three-dimensional space expresses itself in six directions with a center point, which is a seventh. So the seven lower spheres are integrally bound into the very structure of physical space. But you can't add new directions, right? Our mind is used to a three-dimensional world, so you can't add another three directions to there, right? You can do midpoints like northeast, southwest, or whatever it is, but that's not a new direction. That's just between those two, right? That to actually create a new direction would mean to go into a new dimension, and our minds can usually only comprehend three-dimensional, right? So the idea is that so this is another proof to show us that these three top spheres are something that are beyond comprehension, beyond our understanding. This will also extend to anything else that's seven. Like we have the idea that the seven notes of music are connected, are parallel to these seven lower spheres. And there's seven notes of music. You can't invent eighth, ninth, or 10th note, right? Those seven are what it is. Once you get past the seven, then it goes on already to the next octave. But it's just, again the same seven, right? So the idea is that our minds can't comprehend such a thing of adding another three to something that we know is seven. And so because of that, those three upper spheres remain beyond our understanding. Even the angels don't understand it. And then he talks about, he says that then the different levels of angels that manifest in the different worlds are then going to convey this energy downwards. I'm starting to summarize a little bit. I'm not saying all the words inside because I want to get to the main point, and we're sort of getting towards the end. So, but he says the different types of angels, the Srufim take this energy and channel it through Olam HaBriya, and then the Srufim, are the highest level of angels, and then you have the Chayes HaKodesh, the living beings, living entities, are bearing it through the next oilam of Yitzira. And then the Oifanim, like the wheels, their angels are portrayed like wheels because they're the bottom of the structure, are carrying this through oilam ha'asiya, through the next universe, and then down to our world, which is the bottom of the entire, to our physical universe, which is the bottom of the entire structure. So then he goes on and he tells us that there's an idea that, so what happens once the angels bring it down to the physical world? Who directs this energy through the physical world? So he says that the righteous person, the tzaddik, the one that serves Hashem with yira, with fear, and meaning not fear in the negative sense. It doesn't mean like being afraid of Hashem, like you're afraid of someone who bullies you. That's not the point. The point is it's awe, and it's all about the whole structure that Hashem created and how amazing it is, and how Hashem is so infinitely powerful. The person that's able to be on that level is able to bring that energy down and direct it, right? So the idea is, he says there are really two levels in this. You could have someone who's righteous and he's able to bring this energy down, but he doesn't control it as well as someone who serves Hashem with devaikus, which devaikus means cleaving to Hashem or oneness with Hashem. In other words, someone who's just a righteous individual and who serves Hashem, but hasn't really experienced spiritual unifying experiences, which could come sometimes through deep meditation. Sometimes it could just come as a gift. Some people just suddenly have an epiphany, right? Those that haven't experienced anything like that, they can still direct the energy downwards, and their blessings are still effective, and they can channel that energy in the way that they, in a positive way, but that's not as effective as the one who has had such unificatory, if that's a word, experiences where he becomes one with everything and one with Hashem. Someone who has had such transcendental experiences is able, because of that oneness, to direct that energy even better downwards. And then he says, then he goes into the idea of how we have two names of Hashem that we use very often. One is Havaya, Yid Kai Vuv Kai, and that Havaya represents the idea of it comes from the Hebrew word meaning to exist, right? So Havaya means existence itself. Now, existence itself, believe it or not, is a concept that we have very little knowledge of, because existence itself just means without all the details. It's like I said, it says that every yid has within it, or every person, any conscious entity has Havaya within itself, has God at its core, right? That is the self once it's stripped away from all the externals. But the idea of stripping away all the externals is very difficult because we can't imagine ourselves without the externals. So I once told it to my kids, they couldn't do it. Like, imagine yourself, just be conscious, be present, feel what you're experiencing right now. Now strip away what the senses are telling you. That itself is hard enough, right? And now strip away the thoughts. And now strip away all the identifications of yourself that have been created by your lifetime. So strip away the traumas and strip away the positive identifications that your lifetime has led you to understand about yourself. Strip away all emotions. What you're left with is just plain existence, right? It could be done. This isn't impossible. In deep meditation, you can actually get to this level, but it requires a lot of practice. But the idea is that just that pure existence, without any of those defining side points, without any of those garments, right? That existence itself is avaya. That's godliness itself. It's pure existence, pure awareness, right? So, right? I don't mean awareness in the sense of, because a lot of times our awareness we associate with our physical senses, what they tell us. So awareness means like, oh, I'm seeing a computer screen right now. I'm hearing the sound of somebody speaking. That's not awareness. Awareness means just awareness of existence itself and the existence itself, the experience of existing, right? And that is Havaya. That's the Elokus, that's a divinity within each and every conscious entity, which may or may not be separate, because on a true level, there isn't really separate conscious entities. They're all actually just pieces of one existence, right? Like in the Shirim, sometimes we've compared it to the idea of like a security camera, or like every one of us is like a little camera. And then there's the person sitting in the office looking at all the screens, right? Kivyuchel, kivyuchel. There's no person sitting in the office because he is the screens. All of our experiences, all of our awarenesses put together as one. That's Havaya. That's because that's God, right? It's of course beyond that too, because it's not just us. It's all the Maluchim and everything else, that all other entity, all of that combined together is essentially is the Orion self. Because remember, the whole idea is that everything that exists is vessels filled with ore. That ore never changes. It's always the same. In the Siddur Shash, you see this all the time. Ore is always just expressed as Havaya. And then the Havaya is going to different kailim, different vessels. Each vessel looks different, but the ore is always the same. So on that ultimate, deepest, most primal level, that ore is one ore that fills all of existence and all of creation. He says that's Havaya. Then Adna, right? The name that we use to pronounce Havaya, because we don't pronounce the Shem Havaya, we pronounce it as Adna, right? That Adna represents something represents a lower level, right? Puship Shah, we usually say Havaya represents Zah, Zer Anpen, and Adna represents Nik, represents Malchus, right? But in essence, what it really represents on a level is that Adna, that kingship, so to speak, is the expression or the vessel for that or. So that's why Havaya just means to exist. When we call Hashem Havaya, we're just saying you are existence itself. We don't understand anything about you. There's no words that can describe you. You are existence itself, which is something we have no conscious awareness of or knowledge of. Right? Adnar represents the idea, oh Hashem, you're our king. We're already giving it a definition. We're personifying, we're anthropomorphizing Hashem. We're making him into something that we can understand. That's of course illusory, but we have to do it, because without that we can't relate. We can't relate to pure existence if we don't even know what it is. We only relate to it by translating into our experience and saying, oh Hashem, you're our king. Hashem, you're our father. Hashem, you're our or whatever, our guardian, right? Any of these types of terminologies that we express by are just ways of conveying, or putting it in a vessel, so to speak, putting that light in a vessel so it can be grasped to a certain extent. He says those two shaimas really represent the idea of the true reality of Hashem's existence, and then the illusion of the way it manifests in the physical world as a world that appears to be a world of separation and separate beings, and a world that seems to be flying, in the middle of space, and we don't know what's going to happen, and we don't know, we might make a right decision, we might make a wrong decision. We have to, all these different things that we're used to about the world around us. That's all adna. That's the kaili. That's the way the or is expressed, but the or really is one. So he says that the avoida of the tzaddik, and this tzaddik experiences devaikas, that's able to bring those hashpos down to the world in a more powerful way. What does it mean? He experiences devaikas. It means that he's able to break through that illusion and see the or that's within. He's able to integrate havaya and adna, put them together. Right? And that's what we see all the time in the Sephardi Sidirim. For those that are familiar, in the Sephardi Sidirim, we see a lot of times, and the Siddur Shash, and the Siddur Arizal, we see that the Havaya and Adna are sometimes expressed as interwoven. So you have Yid of Shemavaya, Aleph of Adna, Hay of Shemavaya, Dalad of Adna. The names are like interwoven, one letter of one interlocked with one letter of the other, right? That represents the idea of integrating the true reality with its vessel, with its expression, and seeing that the two are really one. He says that's also expressed with Havaya, with Nikidus Elohim, which you see sometimes, right? Usually Havaya usually Nikidus and Havaya, if it's expressed with Nikidus, are the Nikidus of Shem Adna, right? But sometimes we have Havai with Nikidus of Shem Elohim, because that's to indicate the idea that Havai expressed itself as Elohim. Elohim is nature, that's Teva, that's the nature, so to speak, the natural world around us, right? It itself is an expression of Elohis, of Hashem. And the truth, it doesn't say this, but Hashem Elohim itself represents this idea too, because we know that Elohim is a divine name. At the same time, it's a divine name. It's a gematria hateva. It's a gematria nature, right? That shows that nature itself is really this Elohis. So what he says is, he says that Surah Imaini was on such a high level that she was united to Shem Havaya, and she couldn't believe. It's funny. The thing that she couldn't believe is different than what we think. The simple way of understanding the verse is she couldn't believe that she's actually going to become pregnant now. But the way that he explains it is no. What she couldn't believe was she couldn't believe why she needs to become young to be able to conceive a child. She was on such a high level of dvaikus that she's like, why do I need to become young for? I can be an old, 100-year-old, wrinkled out old prune and have a child, because Hashem is infinite and Hashem can do everything. And Hashem doesn't need to express it in a natural way. So what's the point of me having to become young and have my periodic cycle return and all of these things that need to happen for me to have a child? I can have a child just like this. And that's why, and that's what she couldn't understand. That's what she couldn't grasp. Why it needs to be so natural? Why can't it be even more miraculous if Hashem can do anything and everything, right? And then that's the idea of the way that that Rashi explains it. The first verse, the first understanding of the verse is Edna means like expression of youthfulness. So she laughed. Now that I'm old, why do I have to become youthful again? Acher baloisi haisli Edna. Why do I have to become youthful again? I can have the child just as old as I am. Then the other translation of Idan as man, as time. Also, why do I need to why do I suddenly become young and become a young lady again, have all that extra time? What's the point? Hashem, give me the child now. So that's step one. But then step two of this is, he says, that she says, Tzechoik usuli Elokim. She says, Hashem made me laughter. She says that's why she gave the name Yitzchak. Yitzchak is an expression of Tzechoik, which means laughter. Hashem made me laughter, or Elokim made me laughter specifically, right? So he explains the idea is, he really explains it on two levels. First of all, he explains on the simple level like we just said. The laughter is it's almost like funny why it has to be Elohim, why it has to be in the natural order, which Elohim represents Hateva, represents nature. Why does it have to be that I have to become young again to have the child? It's not necessary. I can have the child as old as I am. That's number one. But then he goes even deeper. He says that the idea of tzechoik or laughter, is, he says that that's simcha, joy, right? Those two are connected. And he says that simcha is oisius chamisha, which I think Rabbi Kiva, I think you remember, I think we once talked about this on the phone, I think, about this idea. That simcha is oisius chamisha, which means five. It says that the idea of simcha represents all the five worlds of reality, which are Ak, first of all, Udam Kadman, then Atzilas, Bria, Yetzira, Sia, all five of those worlds together, right? That is joy, that's laughter. In other words, laughter is the actual essence of the world, of the five worlds themselves. That which pervades all of existence is joy. Joy is a basic building block of all of creation. But then he says, but then there's a problem, because joy is at the source of creation, but then the way that creation expresses itself is sometimes not joyful, right? We have a lot of pain and struggles and nisyonis and challenges. But he says it's not, it's all an illusion. He says the joy is at the core of everything. It's just that sometimes the joy represents that or that light, that aura in self, that fills all of creation. In other words, if you were to get to that Havaya, you would get to that or that's within us, stripping away all the externals, getting just to that presence in the middle, just that awareness or existence or sentience, if you want to call it, without all the external trappings, you'd find that is extremely joyful. It's a joyful entity that sits in the heart of us all. And all of the challenges that we have, all of the pain and the anxiety and the fear and the depression and all different challenges that we experience, right, are all external to us. It's all feelings, it's all garments, like we talked about in the other shirim this week too, right? This idea came up. It all seems like there's a theme, like, there's like a theme to the week that pops up in every single shir, it almost seems, right? I don't do it on purpose. It's literally it just comes out this way. This piece I was just looking at, and it happened to be I was talking the same idea about the same idea. All those things are external. In essence, at our core, we are all joyful. And if someone's going through a really hard time, right? Sometimes we go through easier times, then we can resonate with that. Yeah, it makes sense. We're all joyful on the inside. Sometimes we're having a really hard time. It's very hard to say that we're joyful on the inside. It's very hard. But it's the truth. Joy is that Havaya. The essence of experiencing, of awareness, of being here is joyful. Why is it that we don't want to go away from this world, right? Yes, it's true that if a person's very, very depressed, right? So then he doesn't, those people that commit suicide, chas v'shalom, because they were in very deep depression or whatever, that's because those emotions took over and they weren't even in control of themselves, right? But in essence, we have we want to be down here. We want to live. We want to preserve our lives. Why are we careful when we cross the street? We want to live long, right? Why is that we want to live long? Even a person who's anxious or who's having a hard time, he wants to live long, because the essence of existing is joyful. Existence is joy. That Havaya at the core of us all, that existence is joy. Of course, the truth is that's all. The death is an illusion too, because we're not going to cease to exist when we die, right? We're just going to be in a different form. But existence is joy at its core. But the thing is that it's hard to see it sometimes, because the way it manifests on the outside sometimes is painful. And he says that that's when laughter comes in. Because he says, what's the idea of laughter? When does a person laugh? If someone's a comedian, he wants to make people laugh. It's the unexpected that makes people laugh, right? The reason why a joke is funny is because the whole joke is building up certain way that at the end, the last line of the joke, something was different than what I expected it to be. Something happens that's unexpected. That's, someone does something very silly. Someone runs into the room and slips on a banana peel. Why is that funny? That person probably hurt himself, right? But it's funny because it was so unexpected, because it just came out of nowhere. Like no one's expecting this person to suddenly flip over upside down and land on the floor. That's why people laugh, right? So the
I
idea
heard people
of
laugh
laughter.
sometimes when people laugh at negative things because it didn't happen to them. And
Mhm.
psychologically, they laugh about it.
Right. Right. Yeah. Okay. That's also, I guess, a part of it, right? That you're thankful didn't happen to you, right? Yeah, I hear. But the idea is so he says so laughter really represents the idea of being able to see that unexpected, which the funny thing, the hilarious thing about reality is that all of the pain and suffering that we have is not real. And that's something to laugh about, he says. So when a person's feeling a very negative feeling, he's feeling upset or angry or sad or whatever it may be, laugh at the fact that you're actually thinking it's real when it's not really real. That's what he says. Because at the joy, everything's simcha. Then when you're able to laugh at yourself, and that's also something, right? A person feels much better. The person that slipped on the banana peel, he could be very angry now that he hurt himself, right? And that 100 people are standing around and laughing. If he laughs at himself, it almost like diffuses his own negative feelings, right? If a person does something embarrassing, he's like, oops, right? That itself diffuses the
Yeah, but
negative.
can I bring up like a real life example? Say you're giving a shiur right now, and
Yeah.
your kids are going ballistic in the back. Are you gonna start laughing? Or are you gonna tell yo, Kindle, can you keep it down? We're running a shiur out
You're
here.
right. You're right. And because we have a tendency to really take ourselves too seriously, right? And to take our roles that we have too seriously. But in a certain way, we have to, because you're right. If a person would just like, I'm a teacher also, right? So if I would be like in the front of the class and the kids are making trouble, I have a role to play here to keep them under control. If I just let them, just jump around the room and turn their desks over and whatever, then the principal will fire me, right? So we do have a role to play, and we have to play that role well. So we do have to do what we have to do. But at the same time, they're playing the role well. We have to remember it's just a role. And beyond that role, right, the way that we relate to it or the way we feel it, we shouldn't take ourselves as seriously, and we shouldn't take our feelings as seriously, right? Because they're just feelings, because they're external. And he says that if a person's able to get to that, is able to tap into that joy that's at the core of all of reality. That's what it means. Tzchoik usuli elikim. When she says elikim made me laughter, elikim is midas hadin, right? Elikim is judgment. Laugh at it. It doesn't mean laugh at it like, oh, so I can do whatever I want and Hashem can punish me in Gehenna and I'll be laughing in Gehenna. Ha ha ha. That's not what it means. We have a role to play. We have to play it. We have to take the Torah seriously. You can't laugh at the Torah, right? Chas v'sholem. But at the same time, when we make a mistake, learn from your mistake. Don't take it too lightly. But also, yeah, it's just a mistake. It's okay, right? Get back to that simcha that's at your core, and with that, the person can transcend to very high levels. And at the end, he sort of connects it to the idea that Yitzchak himself was Midas HaGvira. So Yitzchak, who was laughter, is again Elikim. Tzchak usule Elikim. The laughter and Gvira are connected to each other. If everything was chesed, if everything was chasun, there wouldn't be any need for laughter. But because there's Gvira, because there's din, because there's challenges, we have to be able to take ourselves a little bit less seriously and be able to laugh through those challenges and be besimcha through those challenges. And in that way, the person can access his true nature, which is pure unbridled joy. Okay, so that's it for tonight. Have a wonderful Shabbos, everyone.
Yeah,
And
Rabbi, are you gonna send out that email about the Chagiya, the Gemara?
right, I already forgot about that. Okay, yeah, I'll send it out very soon. I'm just gonna, I
Right.
think first I'm gonna restart my computer because it's going very slow, and then I'll send it out as a Shem. So have a wonderful Shabbos, everyone. Shirim should be regular, but since my sons or mitzvahs come up in a few weeks, there might be certain nights we have to take care of something or whatever. So look out for emails just in case anything changes. But I hope to keep the shirim more or less on regular schedule. All right. Have a wonderful night, everyone, and a wonderful Shabbos.
Me too, thanks.
My pleasure. Kol tov.